Minister please step forward to the podium?
We see that the problem that opening opposition has identified is this idea of a freedom to make decisions. But that is not the debate we're having today. The debate today is about whether or not we should educate kids about having an outward-looking mindset. It is not about telling us that our policy will necessarily be international or domestic-looking. And this is especially important in the context of today's climate, where we have American kids, for instance, looking and reading at Trump's tweets, where literally he says, buy American, sell American, hire American. That is the kind of pervasive context that we have. Likewise, for Brexit, where you have a lot of nationalistic ideas and populism already being so pervasive and rampant. And it's to countervail against this popular narrative that we think that it's important for schools to start educating kids about having a different mindset, about having something that's a lot broader in its agenda, something that's a lot more international. So let's just deal with some of the constructive material that came out from Elo. He told us about how nationalism is inherently self-interested. Yes, we'll be dealing with that later in my substantive. But more importantly, he told us about this idea of unification. But before I move on, yes.
Why government can control citizens' thought or idea by using education?
Sorry, governments can control citizens' thoughts and ideas, which is why we would like the government to influence their thoughts and ideas to be slightly more broader, slightly more internationalistic. And we've already talked about how there is a difference between nationalism and national pride. We're perfectly fine with each individual having some amount of national pride, but we don't think that that individual needs to have a nationalistic ideology, because nationalism as an ideology is inherently exclusive. That is to mean that if you are a nationalist, you are unlikely to see yourself as thereafter being a global citizen. Versus on our side, where if you are a global citizen, you can be a global citizen and then a Singaporean. Nationalism as an ideology is exclusive, again, not responded to. But the main case that came out from opening opposition was this idea of unification. And I'll be talking to you about why unification does not happen. The reason when you start educating young, malleable minds that the only reason they should feel any affinity for someone else is because they share a similar identity, you're only going to encourage a slippery slope. Why is this the case? Because individuals are going to start looking for common traits that associate themselves with someone else. So for instance, in a Singaporean classroom, if you teach Singaporeans to be nationalistic, at first, yes, they might feel some sort of national pride and they might feel like they need to privilege themselves over, let's say, Malaysians and Indonesians. But very quickly, these individuals will start recognizing that Singaporean, as a majority Chinese society, would, for instance, start to look for those traits instead, such as skin color. So for instance, if I'm in a Singaporean classroom and I'm, not fair-skinned, my Chinese classmates will start to see, oh, my similarities are probably a lot more closely tied with that of another Chinese individual compared to me as someone who's brown-skinned. And that's the problem with nationalism, is that it breeds this kind of discontentment where within multicultural societies, you're more likely to get that kind of tension and that kind of divide. That's not something that we stand for on our side. The comparative, therefore, is when individuals start seeing themselves as human, independent of their race, independent of their religion, where it does not matter your skin color. What really matters is that you are part of this broader idea of humanity. That's something we're very proud to stand for. Again, analysis that my first speaker already told you, ideas of solving world issues, refugee crisis, environmental conservation, tragedy of the commons, climate change, all panel audience member not responded to. Now I'll be moving on to my argument about economic nationalism, because the issue in this debate when we're talking about nationalism as a political ideology also encompasses nationalism as an economic means through which countries can govern themselves. And we see that it's incredibly problematic when countries start to adopt an economically nationalistic mindset wherein they want to privilege things like protectionism, because we recognize that in today's society, almost everything functions on a global supply chain. So the minute you have policies like Trump telling you that you only want to buy American and sell American, you're just going to cost iPhone $4.2 billion in order to manufacture back home in the US compared to manufacturing in China. But this is exactly the kind of mindset you have at a point where you tell everyone that you only want to hire American workers to build your iPhone rather than just building it in China, even though in China it could be a lot cheaper. That's the kind of harms that economic nationalism can have because of things like the global supply chain. That is why countries are still going to go ahead with the TPP, even though the US is no longer a part of it, because they recognize that having such an inward-looking mindset is only going to hurt their own country's ability to access cheaper goods, for instance, or to be able to travel between different countries. These are all the kinds of harms that will necessarily come about when you have opening opposition and opposition benches model in general of having a nationalistic, inward-looking mindset. So what have we proven to you here at Opening Government? We've talked to you about solving world issues, in which we told you that because each individual and each country is going to be self-interested under a nationalistic model, which, by the way, is the main premise that they talked about in their first principle of nationalism, you're unlikely to get real, pertinent world issues being solved. Everything from the refugee crisis to environmental conservation to climate change. These are real issues that are going to affect everyone at some point. Just because it's not affecting you in the short to medium term, it is still something something that is of global concern. Again, not responded to. We also talked to you about xenophobia, where you as an individual might not see another nationality as someone who you want to respect and be kind to, but more importantly, how it can also breed tensions within your own geographical boundaries, within a country, especially that country is multicultural. We also talked to you about economic nationalism. We look forward to the other members of the House responding. I'm incredibly proud to propose.
Okay, that was the Deputy Prime Minister arguing for the motion. So how persuasive was she? Let's